Holiness is pleasing God, not the world. Dear brothers and sisters, Jesus holds up a mirror before us today in the form of the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Both men pray, but they do not address God in the same way. The Pharisee goes to the temple to pray, but he doesn't really pray at all. He talks to himself, not to God. He focuses on himself and his neighbor, in this case the tax collector, widely considered a bad person, is needed to boast about his perfection. There is no doubt who is the center of attention, and his prayer reads like an annual report on his current state of achievements. Everything the Pharisee says is true. He fasts twice a week and gives them 10% of his earnings to the poor. He is doing good. If every Christian did this, the world would change. The problem is he doesn't need God for this, because he doesn't see him as involved. He himself, through his own strength, accumulates merits to boast about before God. In his short prayer, the Pharisee repeats the word I 5 times. In this way, he demonstrates that one can address words to God while simultaneously thinking only of oneself. He speaks passionately, but because he cares about God's affairs. He addresses God with the attitude, "My will be done, not yours." He is a man full of adoration, but rejoices not in who good God is, but in who he is. The tax collector, on the other hand, stands far away in the shadows. He has no catalogue of accomplishment to boast about. What he has gained comes from theft, and his victims were also poor people. In his prayer, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner," he expresses the truth about himself. He makes no excuses or justifications, but sadly beats his breast, as if to punish himself. He knows the truth about his sinfulness and entrusts himself completely to God's mercy. He has nothing to offer God except his own sins and the corruption that has touched his heart. The tax collector does not compare himself with others. He acknowledges the truth about himself and hopes that God's mercy will embrace him. He admits his sin. He knows that his true self is no mystery to God. The Pharisee sees prayer and his spiritual life as a means of self-exaltation, while the tax collector approaches God with humility. The Pharisee considers himself great, even though he is not. The tax collector sees himself as a sinner in need of God's mercy, and he returns home justified, while the Pharisee does not. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, the tax collector receives much more than he asked for. He prayed for mercy and was justified. In his teaching, Jesus challenges the prevailing beliefs of the time. The tax collector reaches the clouds, while the Pharisees' prayer does reach its destination, but it is the destination itself. Comparing oneself to others, humiliating the weak, exalting oneself, accusing others, and self-justifying distorts one's relationship with God. Similarly, acknowledging one's weaknesses, being aware of sinfulness, and having the courage to stand in the truth about oneself bring one closer to God, who is rich in mercy and does not despise a contrite and humble heart. Do people conscious of their sins pray for mercy today? In this day, Cardinal Krajewski says, "Holiness means pleasing God, not the world." On Friday morning, members of the Polish Pastoral Council for Europe, who are beginning their annual deliberations in Rome, participated in Holy Mass celebrated at the tomb of St. John Paul II. Cardinal Konrad Krajewski presided over the liturgy, and Bishop Robert Chrząszcz, the Polish Bishops' Conference delegate for pastoral care of Polish immigration, along with the rectors of Polish Catholic missions and pastors of Poland. The diaspora in Europe celebrated. We eat Jesus every day to represent him every day, said the papal almoner in his homily. Cardinal Krajewski pointed out that today's gospel can be summarized in one sentence: do not ask who my neighbor is, but be a neighbor to others. The bishop shared his personal testimony of encountering the holiness of two individuals. The first was Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She allowed God to live in her, and that is why Jesus worked miracles through her, the bishop pointed out. The second figure was Saint John Paul II, whose gestures and words transformed people's lives. This was possible because he allowed God to live in him. I am to represent God. Cardinal Krajewski reminded us that the gospel calls us to recognize times of grace. We are most beautiful in the world when we are full of grace, he added. This happens when we rise from confession, experience mercy, when we forgive during the Eucharist, when we can consume God. The hierarch added that when leaving the church after the celebration of Holy Mass, I am to be the tabernacle, that is the place of his presence. After Mass, members of this congregation laid a wreath of flowers at the tomb of St. John Paul II. A communal prayer followed by a procession, the passage of the Jubilee Way through the Holy Door in the Vatican Basilica, began the annual meeting which the European body, due to the ongoing Holy Year, is holding in Rome this year. I am to be a place of God's presence. Beloved ones, who is Jesus Christ for me? I see Jesus as an archetype of every possible relationship with the world and the higher relationship I recognize. I began growing into the Jesus gospel in the Dąbrowa Górnicza city 20 years after World War II. In my opinion, the idea of Jesus, which encompasses the generation of those years, understood the idioms of rural life. Today, it seems we no longer understand the agricultural text of the Gospels. The terms bending over the field, taking stock of agricultural work. Jesus no longer stands before us in the figure of the archaic farmer Highlander. The world has changed significantly over 2,000 years. Nature has been overthrown, and a second nature, industrial and business, has emerged. Today, a young person who hears Jesus' blessings and the angelic message of the gospel is not a maintainer, but a hedonist and consumer of all technological goods. The power of industry and technological achievements has opened people to the specific use. In the blessing on the mountain, Jesus' message proves to be the polar opposite of a hedonist, for it is about the total abandonment of this world, a radical sacrifice without compromise. In these days of constant technological and cosmic development, the speech on the mountain may not resonate with the young citizen of the world. And this would be my polemic refutation of modernist patterns regarding the way of life in recent years, so that following the example of the figure of Jesus, we may take all this into account. I wouldn't call this a crisis of church, but a crisis in opening new levels of life to a rather evangelical fact that we are to be pilgrims of hope, also pilgrims of hope in recognizing the time of grace. In the year of hope, Cardinal Riche, at the tomb of St. John Paul II, cried out, "God does not pay, God does not repay. The Lord God always gives."